Hello. I think it's high time we blew something up, so let's have a bit of action in our game. We'll do an explosion. So we're going to use Tweens to simulate a little explosion using white circles, and eventually we'll use something similar to make our menu animate in and out. So we're going to use Tweens quite a bit from now on. We'll start with the most entertaining use of them anyway. We'll do the explosions. And if you're not familiar with Tweens, this is what they do. If you open a new blank FLA like I've got here, I'm just going to draw a circle, get rid of any outlines on it, and I'll just convert it to a symbol for now. The name's really not important, so just press OK. And in the timeline, what you can do, you can right click on an object and you can create a tween. You can use motion tweens or classic tweens. For what we're doing here, it really doesn't matter. Let's do it with a motion tween. You can see that it's chucked a bunch of frames in. The classic tween doesn't do that. You've got to add keyframes, but it really doesn't matter, like I said. First frame here, our circle's totally normal, but if we move down the timeline, select a different frame, click on our circle, and let's change the alpha down to 0. It's already done it. If yours hasn't, just drag that down. And you can see that when you drag along the timeline now, the alpha of that circle changes, it becomes invisible. So by pressing enter, you get a little preview of it. And that's known as a tween. The word tween actually comes from in between, because we've set 2 keyframes, and then the tween does all the in-betweens for us. So we've got the word tween, fairly obviously, from that. We're not going to do it using animation. You can do it if you want, there's nothing to stop you, but this is an ActionScript tutorial series, so I'm going to do it in ActionScript. I'm going to get rid of that, I'll make a new layer and delete the old one. Clear out my library, really don't need that symbol. Let's just delete it. And what we're going to add is a new class, well 2 new classes actually to our project, to simulate a little explosion using lots of white circles. First of which will be one of the white circles that just pops and disappears. And finally we'll do a big chain of them, so we'll have a class that spawns lots of individual explosions to make a bigger explosion. We'll make the first of them now, so if you go File, New, and make an ActionScript 3 class, we'll call this Explosion. If you're not in CS5, just make an ActionScript file and copy what you see on the next bit. So this is what it's generated for us. It's not entirely accurate. We're going to have to import a few things because we want it to extend a sprite or a movie clip. I'll stick with a sprite in this case. So I'm going to import flash.display.sprite, and I'm going to tell it that this class is going to extend sprite. Let's save it. Command S, Control S. Make sure it's got the right name and it's in the right folder. We want it next to our game. Press save. At this point we're also going to need to save the FLA we've made. So the new FLA, let's just save that. We'll call it Explosion Test. Back to the Explosion AS file. And all we want to do is draw a little white circle in the constructor. So in the constructor here, I'm going to use the graphics property or class again. Use the graphics of this sprite to draw a circle. So if you remember back all the way to the last video, which must have been a good, I don't know, 5 minutes ago, we've got graphics dot. We don't need to clear anything, there's nothing to clear, so I'm going to begin fill. I'm going to pick a colour, we'll go O, X, FF, FF, FF. If you want to make it red, you could just go FF, OO, OO, that would be solid red. But I'm going to stick with white because it's what's in the end result. So we're beginning fill, solid white, and we'll draw a circle now by doing graphics dot draw circle. Whoops, circle. Why is it not putting code hints on at the moment? It's not playing fair. Code hints aren't on. Never mind. Hopefully if you've got code hints, when you draw that bracket it tells you what it can take. it takes an x position, a y position, and a radius. In my case, I want the circle to be dead centre, so 0, 0, and I want it to be, let's say, 10 radius, so it's 20 across. And then if we do graphics dot end fill, that will draw a circle for us, and we can test it by going to our new FLA, jumping into the actions. I'm going to get rid of these blank frames, we don't need them. Just got the one frame. And I'm going to make a new explosion, so I'll do var e equals new explosion. And the code hints pop up, great. Var e equals new explosion, e.x equals, I don't know, 200, e.y equals 200, and add child e. Test it, we get an error. I've done something wrong, let's just see. Oh, I've put extend instead of extend. That's why I wasn't getting code hints, because my script was weird. So extend to sprite. And there we go, we get the white dot drawn for us. So we know that much is working. But that's really boring, we want it to move. So we're going to have to make tweens now. Wherever you do tweens, you're going to have to import the tween class because it doesn't get imported into an FLA. So you can see here we're just coding into the FLA, into the timeline, assuming things get imported for us, which normally is fine. Movie clips and so on get imported, but tweens don't. So if you're working inside the timeline, you're still going to have to do this import. And it's fl.transitions.tween. But that's not all we need. We also need the tween event if we're going to respond to tween events. So import fl.transitions.tween event somewhere. Yep. And finally, we need to import the easing functions that let our tween ease in and out of its animations. fl.transitions.easing, and easing in itself has classes inside of it. Now we can experiment with that, so I'm going to import all of them by typing a star instead of a name. If you put a star, it will import every class inside the folder. So if I got rid of all this and put fl.transitions.star, that would import everything in the fl.transitions folder. Not going to do that, it's a waste of time and space. Just going to be selective about what we want, except for the easy. So that's everything we need. Possibly need the event, the standard event class as well. So we'll do flash.events.event. So we're starting to build up hefty imports on our classes, but not to worry, that's the point. And let's say we're going to need some variables. We'll store our tweens in variables, so make tween variables. And eventually we'll have a tween that looks after the alpha of the explosion and one that looks after the size of it. So if we do var tween alpha of type tween and var tween size of type tween, let's be a bit more careful about it. Let's make them private. So only this class can get to them. Nobody tampering around from outside. We're going to do these two tweens in different ways. This alpha tween is purely going to affect the alpha of the object, whereas the size tween is going to have to affect two different properties. That's going to affect the scale in the x direction and the scale in the y direction. So that one's going to be handled slightly differently. But what we'll do in the constructor, we'll set up the alpha tween. And to do that, we put tween alpha equals new tween. And with code hints finally on, it'll tell you the objects, the arguments that go into this tween. And it's saying from argument 0 to argument 6. We don't actually need to change the 6th one because it's got a default value of false, which is fine for what we're doing. I'll just talk you through what they all are because they're not the most descriptive things in the world there. The first one is the object that you want to tween. So in this case, it's this. We want to tween this object. The second argument is the property you want to affect. But you don't just type alpha, as you'd expect. You've got to give it the string value of it, so it's alpha in quotes. Another comma takes us to the third argument, and that's a function. That's the easing that we've imported. So that's how you want this tween to ease between frames, or ease from the start to the end. And I'm just going to go with a regular dot easing out for now. Don't open and close the brackets. We're not actually using it as a function, we're just pointing to a function. Comma again. arg3 is going to be the starting value of this tween. So in the case of alpha, we want to start fully visible, which is 1, and we want to end fully transparent, which is 0. And that's what arg4 is for. arg5 is the number of frames we want this tween to take. So let's say 20 frames, and it's all over. Finally, the argument that I said to ignore is whether you want this tween to use frames or seconds. And we want it to use frames, so we leave that as false, because the value itself is use seconds, true or false. And we don't want to use seconds, so we leave it as false. And that should do it really. If we save that class and test the file, you can see that it fades out. Possibly a bit quick, so I'll slow it down a bit just so you can see. Give it 100 frames. And you can see that the circle slowly fades out over 100 frames. Which is totally fine. But, for one thing, this tween might be going before the object is even visible. So I'm going to cut that. I'm going to cut this tween and its comment out. And I'm going to add a listener for when this explosion is added to the screen, which is why I imported the event class. So I'm going to do add event listener, event.added to stage. So once this explosion becomes visible on stage, we want to initialize it. So we'll make a function called init. Init. We'll make that function, we'll make it private as well. There's no reason for any other class to be able to get to it. Private function init, responding to an event. And we'll just paste what we had. So that sets up the alpha tween. Just save it, test it, make sure it's okay. Still working as expected. We also want to remove this from the world. When it's expired. So we'll add an event listener to this tween so that when it's complete, we remove this object from the screen. So we'll do tween alpha dot add event listener. In this case, it's a tween event dot, and we want motion finish. So when the motion is totally finished, we'll remove explosion. So we need another function, private function remove explosion. And that's responding to a tween event. And we need to remove this from its parent. So if I just type parent.remove child this, we might get a problem. Let's just try it. When it fades out, we might get an error. Guess not. Let's just do a trace to make sure that worked. Trace removed. Save it, test it. Oh well, that seemed to work. I was expecting it to kick up a fuss saying that it didn't know what parent was. If yours does decide it doesn't like this, what you'll have to do is tell Flash what this parent actually is. So in this case we could put sprite and then put parent in brackets, and that would tell Flash to treat this parent as a sprite. Test it, save it and test it rather. See how that goes. Still works, so I'm going to assume that's okay and get rid of the trace. I'm going to edit this class later on to work slightly differently anyway. I don't think this will be used later on, but oh well. So that's one little explosion done, and it's still far from finished because at the moment it's just one uniform size and it doesn't actually change size. So it's not finished. I'm lying through my teeth. Let's set up the tween. Set up the tween to scale the explosion. So we want it to first grow and then fade out. So we'll make it grow faster than it fades out. I'm just going to edit the alpha tween to be back to 20 frames. And I'm going to copy the line. In fact, I'll copy both. No, heads all over the place. Copy the first one, paste it in, and change this to be scale. Tween scale, or was it tween size? Tween size. And it's going to be a new tween. It's affecting this, and now here's the problem. The alpha one affects the alpha. The size, we don't have a size property. We want to affect the scale X and the scale Y. So we need a tween that can control both of them. We could have two separate tweens, but it's a bit of a waste of space. There's no reason to have two tweens. We could just use this one. We'll affect the scale X. We'll just update these. We'll leave that as regular, but we don't want it to start as 1 and end as 0. We want it to start as 0, end as 1. So we want to start with no size and end at normal size. We won't take 20 frames this time, we'll take 10. And now we need to set it up to affect the Y size as well. But if we just try it, let's see what happens. You can see that it's scaling to the side. It's only getting fatter in one direction because we've only got the tween affecting the scale X and not the scale Y. So what we'll do, we'll add an event listener to this tween. So tween size dot add event listener. It's going to be a tween event again, but this time we're going to use motion change. So every time this tween updates itself, anytime the motion of it changes, we want to do something, and we'll put I don't know, apply scale. So we need a function now called apply scale. We'll make it private. Private function apply scale, responding to a tween event. And in here we just want to set the scale Y to match the scale X. So that way this one tween is controlling both properties. Save that and test it. You can see now that the explosion grew properly and then faded out. It's a bit hard to tell at the moment, so let's go back to our new FLA and we'll just wrap this code that we have so far in a click listener. So every time we click we'll get a little explosion. So we'll stage.add event listener, mouse event dot click will do, yeah, and we'll just call it explode. Function explode, taking mouse event, wrap that code in the brackets. Let's just hit the auto format so that it nudges in, and instead of doing 200 200 we'll do mouse X mouse Y. Test it. We should be able to click and we get an explosion whenever we click, which in itself is pretty cool, but you ain't seen nothing yet. And I tell you what, we'll also trace num children just to make sure they're being deleted. Handy little tip. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see that it's dropping. Hopefully now we'll be back to, I don't know, something like 1. Oh. Dope, I just lost it. Run it again. Click, click. Right, we can see that we're never getting too many on the screen, which means they are being deleted. That's all I was after. Let's run it properly and close it. So they are actually being deleted, which is what we were after. But it's very, I don't know what the word is. It's very uniform at the moment. There's not much variance to this explosion. So what we could do here is pass a size for this particular explosion. Let's say let's say here we want the explosion to take a size. We'll do var size equals, we'll say at least 10 plus math.random times 30. So anywhere between 10 and 40. And we'll pass size in there. So we now need to go and edit the explosion class to take a size. Dead simple this time. Just when we draw the circle, sorry, we need to edit the constructor so it takes a variable, an argument, sorry, s colon number, and we'll set a default of 10. Draw circle, and here we want to do s over 2 because the radius of the circle is half of the width, and I was assuming width then when I said size. Save it, test it, and we should get different size explosions now, and we do. If I click in the same place over and over, you can see that ones that come out are slightly different. So far so good. But it's still not finished. This explosion on its own seems to work okay now. But it's nowhere near as good as the explosions in the game where they sort of blow up all over the place around a central area, which is what we're after. So instead of spawning an explosion, we're going to make an explosion chain. So it's going to be lots of explosions. To do that, we'll have to make a new class. We'll come back to the FLA in a little bit, but if we go File, New Class, and we'll call this Explosion Chain. Press OK. We get a new class. We're going to have to import flash.display.sprite because it's going to extend sprite. Add that in, extend sprite, so it's based on the sprite class, which gives us access to all the add child, all the graphics stuff and so on. And it's going to need some variables. Let's say, just put a comment, variables. We'll give it a lifespan, so if we do, make it public for now, just in case we want to change it from outside. In fact, no, private. Private var lifespan, and that's going to be an integer, so a number of frames. Frames to live. Private var, let's have a, I don't know, what could it be called? Birth rate. So the amount of explosions we spawn every frame. So we'll have a birth rate. We'll make that a number, so it doesn't have to be 1 or 2, it can be 0.3. Comment that, so the speed at which to spawn explosions. What else do we need? We'll have, that might actually do for now. Oh, we'll need a size. So private var, should we call it size or radius? Area, we'll call it radius. Blast radius sounds cooler. That can be a number. The area of the explosion. Because we're going to randomly spawn these little bursts all over this area, so we need to know the area. What else do we need? We've got a lifespan, so that's the amount of frames that this explosion chain lasts for. We've got a birth rate, that's how quickly it's going to spawn the little explosions. Got a blast radius. And should we have a blast size then? For each individual blast, we'll have a min and a max. We'll do private var min blast size. That could be a number. Or should it be an int? We'll do it as an int. The smallest size an explosion can be. And to counter that, private var max blast size, also an integer, and this will be the biggest an explosion can be. We're going to have to import the explosion class that we've made, so let's do that, import explosion. And we might even make use of our maths class here. Why not? Let's do it. We've made it. So import reusable code. Was it called reusable code? Dot my maths. Save this file in the same place. Oops, just picked the wrong name. Explosion chain it was called, wasn't it? So that's saved. We've imported everything we need. Set up the variables. We just need to do the constructor now. So since these are all private, what I'm going to do is take them in through the constructor. So we'll do these one at a time. We'll have L for lifespan. That's going to be an int. And we'll set that to, say, 20 as default. BR for birth rate. That's going to be a number. And by default, we'll set it to 0.5. So we'll spawn an explosion every 0.5 frames. The blast radius. I'm going to have another BR, aren't I? So I'll change the birth rate to B. And the blast radius to BR. That's going to be a number. By default, we'll say 20. Really doesn't matter. Min blast size and max blast size. So that can be min B, integer. Minimum blast size of 10, 5. And max B, integer of 20. It's not really going to matter because we're going to set them anyway. In here we're going to set all of these variables based on what we've passed in. Getting quite complicated. This video is already getting pretty lengthy as well, but the explosion is quite a significant chunk of the game. Lifespan equals L. Birth rate equals B. Blast radius equals BR. Sorry, I'm being really slow. It's getting really dark in my room. I might have to go and put a light on. Min blast radius, no size. Min blast size equals min B. And max blast size equals max B. So that's our explosion chain set up. Yeah, so far so good. I think what we'll do for now, we'll add an event listener that ticks through every frame, and then later in the game we'll replace it so that the level class actually controls that. But for now, we'll do it the way we did, the way the ships were all responsible for their own movement early on, and we eventually changed it. So I'm going to import flash.event, and I'm going to add an event listener, event.enterFrame, call it loop as I always do. Actually we'll call it update so it's easier to rehash later on. Keep it public so that later on we can access it from the level file. Public function loop update event, and in here we're going to do the logic of spawning the little blasts. So let's say we'll put lifespan minus minus, so reduce the lifespan. And then we'll have if lifespan is greater than 0, so provided the explosion's still alive. If the explosion's still going, we're going to need another variable at the moment to count our birth rate. So we'll do a private variable called birth counter, set it to 0, it's going to be a number. Okay, and we'll say while, so we're using a while loop, while birth counter is, sorry my brain's a jumble now, What am I doing? Come on, head. I'm using the birth rate in conjunction with this birth counter to spawn. Oh, sorry, that should be 1. So let's say 1. So while birth counter is greater than or equal to 0, should we say, we'll take the birth rate off it. So we'll do birth counter minus equals birth rate, and we'll spawn a blast, an explosion. So we'll do var e equals new explosion. Explosion takes a size now, doesn't it? And we've got the min blast size. So we'll do min blast size plus, and then we want max blast size in brackets, max blast size minus min blast size, so that gives us the difference between the min and the max, times math.random. So we get a random size between the minimum and the maximum. Looks okay. We need to position it, so E is going to need a position. I think if for now we just set it to a random. No, we'll do it properly. E.x. No, before we do that, we'll do var rnd for random. It's going to be the angle that we spawn at. So we're going to do rnd equals math dot random times math.pi times 2, because 2 pi is a full rotation. Have to keep it in radians because we're going to use the mathematical functions. In fact, we're going to use our reusable math stuff, so we don't need to use that one because that works in degrees. So we'll just do times 360. And instead of having a variable for random, we'll just set e.rotation. E.rotation, so the rotation of the explosion we've just made is a random angle between 0 and 360. And then we want to move it along that line. So we're going to use our reusable maths class. We're going to move along that line based on the blast radius of this explosion chain. So we'll do my maths dot, and we want to move forward. I'm going to pass E as the object to move, and S, the distance we want to move, is going to be math.random times blast radius. That looks okay to me. And just so we don't get caught in an infinite loop here, we need to make sure that birth counter gets set back to 1. Yeah? So let's set that back to 1 up here. Every time we start this update function, we'll do birth counter equals 1. Just thinking, the lower that number is, the faster they're going to spawn, just for future reference. And in fact, no, that's not right. Sorry, ignore that. We're not going to set it to 1, we're just going to add 1 back to it as soon as it's less than 1. Yeah, so after the while loop, we'll do birth counter plus equals 1. Every frame it goes up by 1, but it's adjusted based on the birth rate. Sorry, this is a bit advanced. But oh well, it looks cool. Save it. Just have a think before we go back and actually test it. What's missing? Is anything missing? We haven't added the explosion. Add child, E, and then let's say when the lifespan is less than 0, so we'll have an else, and we'd need to remove this from its parent, so we could do parent dot remove child. This problem we might have is that we'll remove it even though there are some explosions still playing, which could be a problem. So we could put else if num children equals 0. So when all of the individual explosions have been removed and the lifespan is over, this will be removed from its parent. Now I've done a lot of code there without actually testing anything, so this could all go horribly wrong in a second, but let's give it a go. So instead now of, in our FLA, instead of spawning an individual explosion, I'm going to use an explosion chain, which is going to take something different this time. So it's going to take the lifespan. In fact, shall we use the defaults? Let's just try that. There goes nothing. Save it, test it, and it all blows up. Yeah, that was expected. Implicit coercion. Value of type explosion. Oh, I've already used E. Don't. I'll call it X. Can't use the same variable name for two different things. Should have seen that. Save it and test it. Oh, it worked, but we got an error. So it was a miracle that much of it worked after going so long without trying anything. We're getting a lot of errors in update in the explosion chain. Trying to think which bit. Could it be this? Should never do that much code without testing it. I got a bit giddy. Let's try that. No, still a problem. Got to remove the event listener, I suppose. Let's try that. So when we remove the explosion chain from the screen, let's also remove the event listener that spawns explosions. Save it, test it. Click. Oh, we have a winner. See how laggy it is. It's actually holding on fairly well and it's working fairly well. So it took a long time. This video is getting on to upwards of 40 minutes, but that worked pretty well. And we can customize that now. We could, instead of just using the default explosion in the FLA, we can edit this. So the lifespan, let's drop that down to 10 frames. Birth rate, let's put that to 1. So we just want 1 spawn every frame. Blast radius, 20 was okay actually. Maybe try 15, just a little smaller. Minimum blast was maybe a bit small. Let's put that to 10. Max blast can stay at 20, so we don't actually need to put that in. Save it, test it. That's more like the way it's used in the final one. So we'll leave it at that. And I'm going to copy this. I'm going to copy that line and get into the actual game. So I'm going to go to level.as, and in here where a ship dies, I'm going to make a new explosion called E, and I'm going to set its position to match the ship. So E.x is going to be, well, we should put this above the removal bit, just so the ship actually exists when we're doing the explosion. Paste it back in. E.x equals ships count, or sh, which we did in the last video up here, where we made a variable to hold that. sh.x, sh.y. Whoa. E.y equals sh.y. Getting ahead of myself. Try it. Hopefully now when we test the right game, test the right file, we get loads of errors because that's cool. We didn't used E again when I shouldn't have done. Let's call it X. and actually add it to the world. Can you tell I need sleep? Oh, no errors. Oh, we've still got all the lines. But it's working. Let's just disable the lines. So we'll go back to what we did the other day, yesterday. Get rid of that. We don't want the lines. Could have just commented it out for future use, but I don't want them anymore. Save it, test it. Shoot stuff. Pow. That actually works fairly well after a lot of waffle from me. Let's just up the number of ships so we can see it. Test it for lag as well. If I put that up to 200, say we can have 200 children at once, we should get a fair amount of stuff on screen. And if it starts lagging now, we're in trouble because there's a long way to go before the game's finished. Seems to be hanging on fairly well. It's not perfect, but you know, it could be far worse. There's a lot of sprites on there. What you could do, if you do find it starts to lag, you just either reduce the quality of everything, which you can, I'll probably show you in a later video, or you can just spawn less explosions, or just stop explosions entirely. Sure, they're nice to look at, but not essential. Let's tone it down a little bit. 200's far too many. Maybe 50. Yeah, not too bad. You can adapt that explosion chain to be bigger, smaller. Let's maybe make it last less time, but produce bigger explosions. What would I just change there? Should have brought the code hints up. Blast radius, min blast set to 5. Let's make that bigger. Let's make that 20, and make the max to 50. So we get huge explosions now. Bang. And they're massive. They're the sort of explosions I used when the player actually dies. Probably want a bigger blast radius if you're going to have things that big. Just tone it down ever so slightly. Make it 15 and 30. Bigger blast radius, 30. And you slowly tinker with it until it looks how you like. So that's maybe too big again, but you get the idea. Right, I've kept you far too long. That's 43 minutes we're approaching now. This is going to take forever to render and upload, but we got there. Next time we'll maybe make the ship die, or we'll tween in the menu. I think that's long overdue. So thanks for sticking with me so far. If you're one of the dedicated few, you shall be rewarded.